1765, the epitome of Rococo. S-curves, sumptuous fabrics, folds, pleats. It's that aesthetic of
Symmetry.
the curves.
Symmetry. We love the symmetry of the 1760s and even into the 1770s. We're still copying the symmetry of homes, the architecture. It was an age of beauty. Beauty was extremely important. Proportion was extremely important. Now what you see us wearing right now are ladies of the upper class of Newport. We're both wearing silk gowns. And all of our clothing is hand sewn because you really can't achieve an 18th century gown on a sewing machine.
So, and the fabrics we're wearing are silk damasks, which were very popular in the time period. They take a pleat well, they move well.
I'm going to have her turn for you and show you the back. Fabric was expensive, labor was cheap, just the opposite today. So the back of this gown and my gown both are pleated to shape. We're taking a square piece of fabric and making it fit a round body, but we're not cutting this length of fabric. This is still all in one piece. So later on, when Mrs. Smith no longer needs this and she's going to give it to her daughter-in-law or her niece, that person can then change it, has the fabric to work with, change it into a later style. We see gowns in museum collections whose fabrics are from the 1740s, made in the style of the 1770s and the 1780s. Fabric was expensive and it was kept. Not like we're the disposable society. We throw things away. They did not throw things away.
And all of the clothing is set on a foundation of stays, which is the 18th century corset. It conforms your body to the fashionable cone shape of the period. They were boned with baleen, which, contrary to popular belief, is not whale bone. It's actually the mouth part of a filter-feeding whale. And what it was essentially 18th century plastic. It has very similar feel and use, and they used it as we might use plastic today. The underneath part, by 1765, you were no longer seeing the very, very wide skirts like you did earlier, except maybe if you were going to court or in a ball gown. So
the silhouette is narrower than it was earlier in the time period. And then later on, the silhouette changes and all the interest goes towards the back in the 1770s and 80s. So it's similar but different. We have similar things today where small differences makes you fashionable, and then you can be dowdy very quickly if you don't keep up. Small changes will make these gowns more fashionable. Changes to the cuffs, changes to the sleeves, changes to the decorations. Those things bring it more up to date.
Fashion came from a variety of places. Once you start getting into the 1770s, a lot of it was coming from France and Marie Antoinette's influence. There was also influence coming directly from England, from the fashionistas at court. People like Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, and those fashion changes did make their way over relatively quickly.
But one thing that we did have access to here in the colonies was a little pocketbook, and honestly, they're no bigger than this. And they had all kinds of helpful things in it, almost like they called them almanacs as well. And it would give you the seasons of the year and so forth and so on, a bunch of fun facts. But they'd also include plates of women in the dress of 1760 and the dress of 1765. And honestly, the plates are no bigger than this. You can find them online and they look like, oh wow, good size, but they're not. They're itty bitty tiny. And we did have here in the colonies access to many of those. Those books kept coming over every single year. And every single year they would update them for the dress. But the real fashion stuff, as Steph said, doesn't come until much, much later.
You could tell your status by what you're wearing and the things that are expensive. Oddly enough, the actual gown itself, the shape of the gown, the style of the gown is the same whether you're rich or poor. The style is actually the same. What changes is the actual fabrics, accessories, and trimming. So while I might have a silk damask gown, somebody of a lower class might be wearing a linsey woolsey gown, where I'm wearing sleeve ruffles and lace.
Lace is a sure
very
indicator
expensive.
of wealth. Very expensive.
I'm wearing white accessories, again with lace. I'm wearing jewelry. Those are the indicators of wealth in the 18th century. Because as Hallie said earlier, fabric was very expensive. In looking at some of the Newport tailors' account books, we saw things like broadcloth, which was one of the most expensive fabrics available. Now we just think of it as wool, but then it was actually a very pricey fabric. So fabric was very available, but it was costly.
And it was imported. There's an idea that women were weaving and spinning and making all of their own fabric, and that's just not true. The fabrics were being imported for the most part from England. Very few French fabrics came over.
And we have to remember we were colonies. We existed to be a market for the mother country. We supplied raw materials and then we bought their finished goods. So, I mean, that's what colonies have done from the beginning of time. So we were a market for British goods.